Hey guys, it's Craig at Area 419. Today we're talking about the basics of positional shooting with a precision rifle. We're going to go through the basics of setting up and doing this in a way that is pretty practical while related to PRS style shooting. If you want a super deep in-depth, there are hours and hours of podcasts and really nitty-gritty fine detail points you'll find all throughout YouTube. But what we aim to do is in a fairly short period of time, get you a pretty broad look at what it looks like to shoot in a positional setting. Again, this is pretty PRS focused, so if you are looking for the fine nuance of bench rest setup or F-class setup, this might not be exactly the right thing for you. But if you are wanting to shoot PRS, you're wanting to shoot sniper style matches, or you're looking to build better positions in a hunting style environment, this is going to be something that's really useful to you. We're going to walk through the basics of building a position. We're going to talk standing, we're going to talk prone, we're going to do some sitting and kneeling, we're going to do tripod, front and rear, as well as go through some common how we might shoot a stage, how we might incorporate some of these elements, and how you can train in some easy drills that can make you a better positional shooter. So guys, as we get into building a position, we're going to show you what it looks like standing and prone, and we've also got very usefully a trigger cam set up on Nathan's rifle so that as we go through this, we'll actually take some shots. You'll be able to see what certain things do through the optic downrange, and we'll show you the difference between certain correct setups and certain improper setups, both with recoil management and wobble zone. As we get into building a basic position, the first thing you need to keep in mind is you need to have a good sight picture, and 1A with that sight picture would be natural point of aim. If you are building positions and you're fighting with what your rifle wants to do, or you don't have a good opportunity to see what's happening downrange, you're set up to fail. So as Nathan starts to get on the gun here, the first things you will notice is he basically oriented the rifle. You saw that little wiggle. The first thing onto the gun in his mind was the cheek, and then everything comes in past that. And as we set up a rifle, if you go through how to fit your length of pull, your cheek, your grip, all of those things for you, they're all based around the idea of if I had Nathan blindfolded and said, Nathan, get on your gun, and then pulled the blindfold off, his natural point of aim, his basics of setup, when he opens his eyes, are going to have him looking through the optic onto the reticle, and it's going to be basically in the direction that he wants it to be from that position. We've got Nathan's face on the gun, comfortable cheek weld, and when he's got a moderate amount of pressure, his eye line is through the center of the optic. The next thing that's important is we want to make sure that our shoulder is positioned appropriately against the butt pad. Something we'll get into more as we look top down from prone. Nathan's shoulders are basically square here. This is an important thing to keep in mind because when he pulls that trigger, whether it's a 6BR that's barely moving the bullet or something significantly larger in a hunting setting, that recoil impulse is going to move the rifle back, and typically over a center point is going to tilt it some amount. Now, we've got a Hellfire match muzzle brake on the rifle. It's going to do a great amount of work in keeping that rifle from moving, but the reality of rifles is they do move. He's got good stable contact between the heel of his hand and his grip, and he's got a nice 90-degree trigger position with his right hand. Now, as we move from position to position, what's happening with Nathan's left hand will change. Here, he's got the rifle set on a Schmedium Game Changer. We think it's the best bag made for positional shooting. And he's got his left hand working around his handguard, squeezing into that bag. That's going to add additional stability that's going to help with his wobble zone. We're also looking at how he's building support on his body. Nathan's knees, they're a little knocked, but they're not bent. Wide base, straight legs, all of his bend happens here at his waist so that he's getting support with gravity and with straight extremities so that he's not counting on muscle structure, rather on gravity and bone structure. These elements, whether we are standing, kneeling, sitting, prone, or you're shooting in some really awkward position that's thrown at you by a match director, if you have those four things right, you're in a position to succeed. That is our position when we're standing, and we're gonna cut, and we're gonna come right back, and Nathan's gonna be in the prone. We've now gone to the prone. As Nathan gets in position on the gun, we're gonna go through that initial checklist we did when we were standing. His cheek is in a good, comfortable place on the cheek pad so that where his head is sitting, he is naturally looking through and capturing the sight picture efficiently. His shoulder is engaged. Again, his shoulder line is square to the rifle. That's going to afford him the opportunity for good recoil management. His right hand is positioned exactly as it was when we were standing, and we've got that core position built every single time. I'm gonna sound like a broken record when I walk through. Is your cheek in a position that you got an appropriate sight picture? Are your shoulders square to the rifle so that you can manage the gun and manage recoil? Is your hand comfortable? Nathan's got his left hand, his support hand on rear bag, That left hand is going to continue to change a little bit as we go from position to position. So the drill we'll give you at the end is good for practice of that. But right now what we've got is that same position we had when we were standing. We've got those core elements translated to prone. Just like when we're up top, or when we're kneeling, or when we're sitting, or when we're prone, Nathan's got a little bit of pressure into the gun. Free recoil is a thing you'll hear talked about. True free recoil can result in some accurate shooting, but it's very difficult to manage recoil and spot anything downrange. And putting an enormous amount of pressure into a rifle is just adding extra tension that in most of these settings is going to be unnecessary. Something that we'd like to show you, and is important to show you, and we'll do it with live fire through the trigger cam, is Nathan is currently set up very square behind the rifle. So you'll see as we take some shots, Nathan is going to have a sight picture that's really stable. We will then cock his body about 15 degrees to the side. You'll often see new shooters get in a position where their hips are significantly moved over, where their shoulder line is not squared to the rifle. Through the trigger cam, you'll see exactly the issue that you'll often see when people are not square behind the gun. So those are our foundational elements of building a position, either standing or prone. The next thing we're going to talk about in the next video is how those translate to seated and kneeling, or kind of those intermediary positions. So stay tuned. All right, so we've gone through the basics of building a position and let you see what it looks like downrange when you have something built well and when you have something built poorly. It's important to understand what the balance point of your rifle looks like and how you're interacting with the rifle on pressure. So if Nathan were to totally let go of his rifle, it's going to be pretty balanced here. This is an important thing. If your rifle wants to sit still and wants to sit flat, it's going to make your job in keeping it still and keeping it flat much simpler. So as he put together his rifle, he's got weights in certain places. He knows where all of his parts and pieces are. His barrel length and contour makes sense, so that balance point for him is roughly 4 inches in front of his mag well, which gets him into the center of a schmedium. As we get onto a gun, whether you're standing or you're kneeling or you're sitting, a basic amount of pressure, as we talked about in the position building episode, is also important, because we want just enough pressure on the rifle that it reduces that wobble zone. Now the trick to positional shooting, as you guys all very well may know, is not necessarily when you're prone or when you're standing at full height, but it's all those intermediate heights. One of the most common ones you'll see, or a most common range you'll find, is what happens when you are between, dead in the middle, standing and prone. So I've got Nathan set up here in a kneeling position, and I'm going to go through some of the fundamental elements that are pretty important here. So as he's on the gun, obviously sight picture, face are correct. He's got a nice grab, nice square purchase with his shoulder. His right hand is in that same position he's going to get into every time. His support hand is in position, working to stabilize the rifle on the bag. These are things that we talked about when we were standing. What I want to focus on here is everything that's happening behind the shoulder. A really important point of good intermediate height position is to find bone-on-bone support and not be dependent on any muscles. If you have to be dependent on muscle, so let's say you're in a low standing position, you always want to use the biggest muscles you can. Bones are great, they don't bend, they're very static. As you get into muscles, the smaller the muscle, the less supportive it is, the less consistent it's going to be. So we don't want to use small muscles in our hands and wrists. We want to use large muscles, your butt, your quads, your hamstrings. These are the kind of things that will help you. But as we're in a kneeling position, some elements that I want to bring into focus. The first one, Nathan's rear leg, his left leg. Femur here, his quad, it's straight up and down. This is getting the major weight of his body directly into the ground. If it were tilted way back or tilted way forward, that would be putting pressure on a muscle that we don't want to do. So the weight is sitting simply straight down his left leg into the ground. His remaining weight, his shoulder, what's supporting his trigger arm and his support arm, right leg that is 90 degrees. It is his trigger side leg that is up. This one's important. You want the side that you pull the trigger with, so if you're right-handed, your right leg, that's the knee that you want up. This lower leg is directly vertical, so we've got a nice 90-degree angle here and a nice 90-degree angle here. And again, that is getting all of our pressure into bones on gravity. You're not dealing with a kneeling position that's super far forward, because do this for a minute or two in your living room and you'll feel it. Or if you're super far back, do that for a minute or two in your living room and you'll feel it. But this basic position built on 90-degree angles of your left knee and your right knee is really stable, and you can stay here a long time. So as Nathan gets his lower body set appropriately, he then brings his basic upper body position into the right spot. I like having this right knee up specifically because of what's happening right here. His right bicep being able to interact with his right knee. One of the things that we'll get into that's really important is that right knee, your shooting side knee, being the one that's up. The reason we like this, we've built our position, we've got strong 90-degree angles at our left knee and our right knee. And based on the height that we're working at, whether it's right at this height or a little higher or a little lower, as we get taller in a kneeling position, get on your gun. So we can either have this kind of inner bicep on knee contact, or as that position gets a little higher, that elbow can be on that knee, or as it gets even lower, you've got that knee potentially coming all the way up into your right bicep. This is effectively, I've always felt, like you're almost finding a little bit of a rear bag in your shooting side knee. Many people will naturally try to get into an opposite setup here, where they're supporting they're taking their offside knee, their support side knee, and supporting that other elbow. I've always considered my trigger finger to be more important than my entire support side hand. So getting that balance onto the trigger side, the side that's going to have the most interface with what actually happens at the critical moment, it's always worked better for me. And if you go to a match and watch the people that are really, really shooting well, a significant majority of them, when they bring a knee up to support, are going to bring that shooting side knee up for a reason. And whether this is a kneeling position, as you're seeing here, or a seated position, Nathan, go all the way to your butt and swing your left leg underneath you. As you get into a seated position, just the same, and obviously our prop is a little different height, you're going to do many of the same things. Again, your weight is all the way on the ground with your butt. You're going to use that right knee the best you can, either Indian style like that, or bring your foot out here. And you've got that same similar contact. As you get into different heights, and a drill will go through at the end that again will address so much of this, it's about how are you taking tension off of your muscles, how are you using gravity to your advantage, and then finding these additional points of contact. So guys, that's a short little look into a basic philosophy of what happens when you're not standing or you're not prone. What are those intermediate positions going to look like? These are the ones that take the most practice, but in reality are going to be the difference between shooting really well in a match and feeling like you struggled through much of a day. Now to the live fire portion of this video, we're going to go back to how much pressure we're putting into the rifle. So we're going to send a couple rounds that are truly free recoil, where there's virtually zero pressure on the butt pad of the gun. You'll likely see a very still wobble zone, but the gun will have a lot tougher time under recoil, into a light press, light to medium press, which is what you'll commonly see, which balances your wobble zone and your recoil management really well as a really heavy press, which can be a lot to manage as you try to break a clean shot. So we'll let Nathan get into live fire. So that'll wrap up what we're talking about on taking that basic position and then moving it into non-standing, non-prone, kind of those intermediate parts. The next thing we're going to talk about is tripods, so stay with us. So now we're going to talk tripods. In the competitive shooting community, tripods are a very, very controversial item. There are entire poorly run meme pages dedicated seemingly to people that don't understand what role one can play in a match. So what we're going to talk about with tripods is how we use them in front support, and again, this is really common in both competitive community, but it's also really useful in practical precision if you're shooting sniper matches or if you're hunting infield. Tripods have become a really big deal for easily mobile support. And then we'll get into rear tripod, which is more often than not going to be kind of a gamey situation in a match. Some basics of setting up a tripod, if you can, get it to a height that makes the most sense. We're in the middle here with a pretty awkward kind of medium standing, and we want to talk about some things there. Just like we talked about balance point on a barricade, balance point on a tripod is also important. While we've got here a 2Vets QDT V2 tripods, good tripods, an old Really Right Stuff leveling head that I've had for years and years. This is a really capable unit, and we could realistically attach the tripod way out on the front end of the handguard of the rifle and it would hold up. But as we're gonna get into, we typically don't actually like for a tripod to be 100% tight. So having a balanced rifle and having that ball head or that leveling head at your balance point is really important. So Nathan's set up here, he's locked in. Importantly, as we set up, this rifle can still be moved. So while this is fairly tight, going 100% tight with a tripod on front support is typically a poor idea. We're at what we'll call 90% tight. So as you can see here, if we move the rifle, it stays, but it's obviously not locked in. As he gets on the gun, what you're gonna notice is all the things we've talked about in previous videos, that his face is in that common spot, his shoulders are square, his hand is comfortable, and we've got solid support through his lower body. So while standing all the way up is not gonna work for him, the first thing that he did to lose height is he widened his legs. He's got a nice solid support structure underneath, and then having to bend, he bent at the waist. You don't want to bend at your knees. You don't want to bend through your back. Let's bend at those big solid muscles so we can be really solid on the gun. What you're doing with your support hand when you're shooting front support tripod is kind of a personal choice. It's very common for people to do what Nathan's doing here, where he's actually holding the other side of the tripod like this. You'll see some that want to use a sling, rope it around their arm and reach through to the center somewhere. If you're shooting in a really dynamic setting where you're moving aim a lot, some people might like on a leveling head to be down here, on a ball head to be on your tension control, as well as some people who will go ahead and put their hand all the way up at the fore end or on the handguard because that's what they're familiar and used to. So when it comes to shooting from a front tripod position, it's a training deal. The way that people will mostly lose themselves shots or lose themselves time with a front support tripod is they simply don't know how to deploy it and they simply don't know how to set up. If you can practice those things, you can do it in your living room, tell your wife to go to bed early or something so you've got some space, but deploying and getting set up in a front support tripod is pretty straightforward. Whether you're a competitive shooter, a practical shooter, whether you're somebody that wants to go out and shoot more efficiently in hunting settings, you need to know how to do this well. Now we're into the portion of the tripod that really gets all the attention, and this is rear support with the tripod. The use case for rear support is much more narrow than you might think, but in situations where you need it, you really need to know how to be good at it. We found one of the common use cases that you'll get for rear tripod, and that is where you cannot get the whole gun into something to balance on, like on a larger bag like a medium. So we've got a grip changer here under the gun. We're obviously not all the way to our balance point. We cannot get there. The optic's too tall. We've got the Raptor on top. So this is an ideal situation for using rear tripod support. The most important thing that I'm going to tell you about rear tripod support is if you don't know what you're doing, it's a wonderful way to screw up an entire stage. But what Nathan's got set up here is a pretty ideal rear tripod. We've got the tripod set up. It's extended to the point that we need it. The specific height of your tripod when doing rear tripod isn't super important. You just need it to be tall enough where whatever your lower butt pad on your stock is, your tripod is tall enough that you're out on a leg. Pay a lot of attention to what's happening here with Nathan's right arm and left hand, the rear of his lower bag rider, as well as the leg of this tripod. This situation of support here where the leg is effectively functioning as a rear bag as well as a support for his right arm is the entire key to doing rear tripod well. So as Nathan sets up, if he were to try to shoot through this porthole without a rear tripod, it's going to be really difficult. He's not on his balance point. He's forward of the balance point with his rifle. This thing's going to want to be heavy from behind. But the reality is with this type of support through Nathan's optic, it's going to be really, really still. He can shoot a tight group, he can track his recoil, he can really make it work here. Things to be careful about when you're shooting with rear tripod. Nathan, pan as though your target is 40 yards to the left of where you're aimed now. This is a struggle. When you need to move the rear of your rifle toward the tripod, it can really be quite difficult because he naturally picked up the tripod to move it. But if you go back to the position where you were, if you're in here and you simply try to push the tripod, things are going to start happening that you don't like. You're going to start to see these legs fold. Your tripod's going to try to bounce and skitter across the ground. Now, if the target were off to the right and he's trying to move the rear of his rifle to the left, that's really quite simple. It comes with you. But a common thing that you'll see at matches with people that are shooting rear tripod and have not practiced it a lot, or even some that have practiced it a lot, is as you move, trying to get that tripod to move with you, and the taller it is, the bigger of a pain it is, can be really difficult. This is something you need to practice. But if you can get proficient at setting up a tripod relatively quickly, getting into position, and knowing how to use that left hand, your bag rider, your tripod leg, and then your right arm to all come together around something that's stable into the ground, it's a really useful position in a handful of applications that you might see more often than you think. That kind of wraps up our actual position building. We've gone through the basics of getting together your face position, your shoulder, and your right hand, how your left hand works, how your lower body works through different heights, and how a tripod may come into play. What we're going to talk about next is how some of this may apply specifically in a match setting, as well as at the end, we're going to go through my favorite drill for practicing all of these things in a dynamic setting. So if we've gone through how we like to do position building, the reason for all of it, and as we tie it kind of together, is to be able to be more efficient in a practical setting, whether that is a complicated stage where you're shooting troop lines or various near, far, far, near type items, or you are shooting a sniper match and you're trying to find something. For me, it's always been important to have the basics of position building be super repeatable, because when I get on the gun, I don't want to be worried about what is my body doing, you know, how should I be, what am I doing to get into a nice position to break a shot? I want to be thinking about what's happening downrange. Where's my target? Is my dope good? What's happening with wind as I break a shot and go to the next one? What happened downrange? So for me, building reps and having a lot of experience in getting on a gun, getting that sight picture, getting that body position, having my right hand be in the right spot, having those things be automatic buys me a lot of time to think about other things. Nathan, what are some common mistakes that you see as new shooters try to build position and obviously don't have their kind of fundamental ducks in a row?
Being square is a big one. Fumbling with equipment, bags, tripods, stuff like that. So, I mean, little details matter. How I throw the bag on the tip of a tank trap versus a barricade arm is different. So there's just little nuance.
When's the last time you used a bag that was not the schmedium?
Never.
Right, it's such a fundamental, you know, you see a lot of memes or posts or whatever about PRS being a gear game and these people walking around with 15 bags attached to them. The reality is you're not seeing that among people that compete at a really high level. It might be something that a new shooter tries to fight with or tries to deal with, and how many different things can I put together to try to find an easy button. It doesn't really work that way. For me, if I'm coming up to a stage, I want to be able to get my gun down and get that first shot off quickly. I want it to be a good shot. And the fewer pieces of variable gear I have, the fewer things there are for me to think about that aren't get the rifle down, get a good point of aim, get on it, and make a nice clean target, make a nice shot on a clean target. When you are building position, what's something that you think about to make sure you're doing it right? You know, do you have a mental cue that you're jumping into?
I mean, I think most of it's repetition, especially on something standard. I mean, I can walk up and go between all four of these with my eyes closed, but height, I guess, you just look at the different heights. I know that this low and lower gets weird for me because I'm taller, so I got to really, from my knee height to standing, I just bend and lower differently.
And we'll walk through the drill that I'm leading you guys to, and the next one is one that's specifically related to that. For me, a mental cue that's important is when I am moving toward putting the gun down in any environment, is how can I put the gun down to where I have to do the least amount possible to put that bullet on target. A big breakthrough for me when I went from really struggling in shooting to, for a period, was shooting fairly well. It was the idea of I need to not tell the rifle to do something so often. Rather, how do I use what the rifle already wants to do with proper position building to let it do the work for me? If you're trying to muscle a rifle through a stage or through a position, you're gonna find yourself struggling with it more often than not. Another thing that comes into play here as we're building solid positions is understanding how you like to shoot certain stages. The idea of keep your face on the gun. You're gonna hear that a lot. Phil Vallejo, modern day sniper, he and Kalen love talking about the idea of keeping your face on the gun. It's very important. And then as you're building position, if you have a good position, staying down but understanding to learn your controls. Elevation turret, or with my optic, I shoot a collis. I've got windage on my left side. Everything's off to the left, so when I'm 2 eyes open, I can see what's happening downrange through my optic, as well as seeing everything that's happening on the left side of the gun for me. That is I use like a quarterback style armband. I've always liked those. I've got all the data that I'm going to need out to the side here. Nathan's got his range card, his dope card on the left side of the gun. So the idea of being able to get in that position and have everything where it needs to be is really important. Nathan, any final kind of thoughts or tips as we get into position building that somebody needs to keep in mind as they start to train this?
The best guys, you watch them do it and they look like they're moving slowly because they're just doing it right the first time.
I've always been in awe of watching like Dave Preston shoot, because when I got into shooting, Dave was already winning national championships. He's a monster of a shooter. And the guy will look like he's shooting in slow motion, get done and have 25 seconds left on the clock, because he's a very efficient mover through a stage.
Like if you sprint to a barricade, get your bag down very quickly, and spend 6 seconds scanning for the target, it doesn't matter. You lost all your time. That's way more important than how quickly you rack the bolt or whatever.
I also see a lot of people try to get off shots really quickly. And in all the matches I've been to, all the stages I've shot, I have never missed fast enough to win anything. You'll commonly see that as a person, especially a new shooter, is learning how to build positionally. I don't care if you get all 8 or 10 or 12 shots off with a ton of time left. If you're not hitting them, it just doesn't matter. So when it comes to shooting practically, shooting in positions, how are you getting stable? How are you getting solid? How can you make clean trigger pulls? And the speed and the efficiency and the flow will come with time and with reps. So guys, that closes up kind of the instructional portion here. We're gonna come back with one more video, a final one that will show my favorite drill, one that we kind of touched on here for a little bit, in building what is quick, repeatable, fluid, different positions that'll be really useful to you, whether you're shooting a PRS barricade or you're shooting on rocks or a tank trap or a cattle gate, whatever it is. So that's one more we got for you. Stay tuned. All right, guys, it's now time for my favorite drill for position building. Now, we have talked about the idea of getting on a gun, getting your face on appropriately, having a nice shoulder connection, everything being square, getting your shooting hand in the right position, and having your upper body set. You're gonna have to learn that. You're gonna learn that through reps. You're gonna get instant feedback through the optic when you're shooting. But my favorite drill is teaching people what to do with their lower body to provide that support. I so often see people get into a shooting position where that prop is lower than this, but taller than about this. In this hole, you'll see many people struggle. This is a really awkward height. So the best way to train this is find any vertical surface. This can be a door frame is a common one, or something that you can look up and down. And what I would challenge you to do is think about, if I have to shoot from any of these given heights, how do I go to the next inch lower, all the way to the ground? I'm gonna show you what this looks like for me. Keep in mind that my body and your body aren't the same. They don't move the same way. I have different strengths. I have different weaknesses. I'm a pretty flexible guy. You might be somebody that's not so flexible, or you might have a little bit bigger body, or you might be more flexible or more strong in certain ways. You have to practice this on your own, because I'm gonna show you how I do it, but how you do it may not be the same. And understanding how your lower body works, your upper body, it's gonna work the same way every time, but your lower body is gonna vary based on where you're shooting. So I want you to start at a high position, and for me, as I start going a little lower, first things that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna widen my feet. That's about as wide as I can get my feet without feeling any pressure from flexibility issues, and it's nice and stable. I got a good base here, but I also don't have to use the muscles in my legs to support me here. From here, if I wanna go a little lower, all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna push my butt back. I'm bending at the waist. As you push your butt back, your upper body's gonna stay centered, and I'm gonna be pretty stable. I could stay here for quite a long time. It's not as good as a nice kneeling position or a full standing position, but I can shoot well here. I can get to about this height shooting standing before I start to get uncomfortable. As I go lower than this, I feel a little bit stretch in my hamstrings, start to get a little unstable. I don't love it. So when I get lower than about this, the next step for me, and my eye line has stayed at the same spot on that vertical surface in front of me, I'm in a tall kneeling. From here, as I get lower, I just lean in to that right knee, as we talked about in an earlier video in this series. I can go a little bit lower, watching that arm slide down, is I need to continue going lower. I can push that right foot forward just a little bit. Don't bring it back underneath you, push it forward. And I can start to lower my body down onto that kneeling position. Past here, getting any lower and kneeling is not going to work super well for me. So I am going to tuck my foot under. I'm going to be seated, and now I'm in a high seated. And I'm at the same height that I just left. Now from here, I can continue to go a little lower. I can even start to do some things like this and put a foot and a knee stacked up to get into a lower position. And from here, I'm going prone. Something that we commonly see in prone to pay attention to, don't go super bottom low if you don't have to. Keeping an extra inch off the ground can be important. But understand that as you're moving through these positions, you need to be in a position where you're not worried about your lower body. That's step number one. Don't be worried about it. Don't be uncomfortable. Don't be straining. Don't be shaky because you're putting a lot of tension into a muscle that you're not used to doing. Past that, if you have the opportunity to use your body to your advantage, so using this shooter side knee as a support, do it if you can. This is the most important drill that I can give you for knowing how to get into positions fairly quickly, in a way that you feel comfortable, in a way that is stable, because the upper body, we want it to be as close as it can be to the same every single time. Your lower body is going to have to continuously be different. So as you can move up and down and you know what to expect in different heights, you're going to remove variables from your shooting, and you'll be able to worry about more things that are happening downrange and fewer things that are happening right here. You cannot hit targets right here. You got to hit targets downrange so you can get good here so that you can hone your skills down there. Guys, that wraps up our series. If you want a little bit of bonus to go with this, I would say find props of different heights and work on, once you know what you're doing with your lower body, how quickly can you get into position, set the rifle, and break a shot. If you can get all your different heights and consistently set a rifle and break a shot in about 10 seconds, you're going to be really solid and you're going to be really fast. Guys, we hope this content's been good for you and you've learned something. But again, we hope you learned something. What did we miss? What do you like to do differently? And what else do you think could be added to this to really help a new shooter as they get into positional shooting? I'm Craig, here with Nathan and Bryce. We've really appreciated all of you guys' support. We like doing this with you. And until the next time.